Hollywood's golden age wasn't golden for everyone. Some visionary directors watched their masterpieces crash and burn at theaters, only to be rediscovered decades later. These 1950s box office disasters bankrupted studios, ended careers, and drove filmmakers to drinking. Yet today, film schools worship them. Which legendary director almost quit cinema after his biggest flop? Stick around for number 3. It changed American movies forever. Number 9. The Killing, 1956. Stanley Kubrick's heist film was too innovative for 1950s audiences, completely tanking at theaters despite being one of the most influential crime movies ever made. Following a group of small-time crooks robbing a racetrack, the film's fractured timeline and morally ambiguous characters confused viewers expecting straightforward good guy, bad guy narratives. United Artists had no idea how to market it. They butchered the editing, forced Kubrick to add explanatory narration, and then barely promoted it. The poster looked like a cheap B-movie, and theaters buried it in terrible time slots. It made just $320,000 against a $500,000 budget, nearly ending Kubrick's career before it truly began. Sterling Hayden, the lead actor, admitted he almost quit acting after the film flopped. "I thought we'd made something special," he later said. "When nobody showed up, I figured maybe I didn't understand what good cinema was." But legendary French critics at Cahiers du Cinéma recognized its genius, calling it a perfect demonstration of American cinema's untapped potential. Years later, Quentin Tarantino cited The Killing as the primary influence for Reservoir Dogs, and its DNA runs through everything from The Usual Suspects to Baby Driver. Kubrick himself said, "Sometimes the audience has to catch up to you." And with The Killing, they finally did, just decades too late. Number 8. Kiss Me Deadly, 1955. This noir thriller took detective films and twisted them into something borderline apocalyptic. Ralph Meeker's Mike Hammer isn't your typical noble PI. He's a brutal, amoral thug who stumbles into a plot involving a mysterious glowing box years before Pulp Fiction made that a thing. Director Robert Aldrich deliberately made one of the nastiest, most nihilistic films of the decade. The studio panicked when they saw the final cut. They forced Aldrich to change the ending, rearranged scenes, and dumped it into theaters with almost no promotion. It made less than $750,000 and got condemned by the Legion of Decency for moral ambiguity. Critics called it repugnant, sadistic, and a film made by a man who hates everyone. The production was famously tense. Aldrich fired his assistant director midway through shooting. Meeker and co-star Albert Decker refused to speak to each other off camera after a fight about politics. The film's infamous glowing box wasn't even planned, just a last-minute solution when the original prop malfunctioned. French critics later declared it a masterpiece of American cynicism. Director Alex Cox called it the definitive exploration of nuclear paranoia in film noir. Today, it's in the National Film Registry, and filmmakers from David Lynch to the Coen brothers cite it as a major influence. As one critic noted, "It took us 30 years to realize Aldrich wasn't exploiting our fears, but predicting them." Number 7. Paths of Glory, 1957. Stanley Kubrick's anti-war masterpiece was so controversial that France banned it for nearly 20 years. Kirk Douglas stars as a French colonel defending soldiers accused of cowardice in World War I, exposing the callous brutality of military leadership willing to execute their own men to save face. The film was a financial disaster, earning just $1.5 million on a $935,000 budget. Theaters across America refused to show it, calling it un-American, despite being set in the French army. The Pentagon, who originally supported the production, withdrew their endorsement and condemned the film. In France, the government banned it until 1975, claiming it damaged military morale and national honor. Filming was absolute misery. The trenches were filled with real mud that caused numerous injuries. Douglas and Kubrick clashed repeatedly over the tone, with Douglas wanting a more optimistic ending. The famous tracking shots through the trenches took days to perfect, with Kubrick demanding so many takes that crew members began calling him Stanley Kubrizy. Roger Ebert later wrote, "Hike, Paths of Glory was the moment cinema grew up, and François Truffaut declared it the finest film about men in war." Today, it consistently ranks among the greatest war films ever made, proving that sometimes the most difficult truths take decades to be recognized. Number 6. Touch of Evil, 1958. Orson Welles' border town noir masterpiece was butchered by Universal Studios, who reshot scenes, re-edited it against his wishes, and dumped it as the B feature on a double bill with The Female Animal. This borderline experimental film about corruption features one of cinema's greatest opening shots, a 3-minute unbroken tracking shot that still leaves directors in awe. The studio heads hated it. They took the film away from Welles, added scenes he never approved, and cut 20 minutes. When Welles saw what they'd done, he wrote a 58-page memo detailing the changes needed to save it. The studio ignored him completely. It grossed just $2.2 million, devastating the already struggling Welles. The production was notoriously chaotic. Marlene Dietrich joined the cast at the last minute as a favor to Welles. Charlton Heston only took the role because he thought Welles was directing, then discovered Welles was merely acting. When the original director dropped out, Heston insisted Welles take over. Years later, Heston called it the biggest favor I ever did for cinema. After its rediscovery in the 1970s, filmmakers from Scorsese to Spielberg championed it. In 1998, editors finally restored it according to Welles's original memo. As critic David Thompson noted, Touch of Evil stands as perhaps the most painful example of American cinema rejecting its greatest talent at his creative peak. Number 5. Ace in the Hole, 1951. Billy Wilder's savage indictment of media exploitation tells the story of a disgraced reporter who discovers a man trapped in a cave collapse and manipulates the rescue to prolong his exclusive story. Kirk Douglas delivers one of his darkest performances as a journalist who literally keeps a man dying to revive his career. Paramount executives were horrified by Wilder's cynicism. They changed the title to The Big Carnival, cut out the most biting commentary, and barely promoted it. Audiences who expected the wit of Wilder's earlier comedies walked out in disgust. The film lost over $700,000, a huge sum in 1951, and damaged Wilder's standing at Paramount. Kirk Douglas later revealed he was terrified to play such an unlikable character. "I told Billy, nobody will like me in this," and he said, "They're not supposed to." Critics savaged it, with The Hollywood Reporter calling it a distorted study of corruption with no redemptive qualities. Bosley Crowther declared it a brazen, uncalled-for slap in the face of American journalism. Decades later, the film was rediscovered as prophetic. Media studies programs now teach it as the first film to accurately predict the rise of exploitative 24-hour news. Roger Ebert wrote in his late career review, "Wilder's most overlooked masterpiece seems more relevant with each passing year, a film that saw our future and shuddered." Number 4. Sweet Smell of Success, 1957. This acid-tongued noir about a powerful gossip columnist and a desperate press agent bombed so badly, it ended director Alexander McKendrick's Hollywood career. Burt Lancaster and Tony Curtis deliver career-best performances as two of cinema's most repulsive characters, trading dialogue so sharp it could cut glass in smoke-filled Manhattan jazz clubs. The film cost $3.1 million to make, but earned just $2.4 million. A disaster for United Artists. Lancaster's own production company took a massive financial hit. Audiences expecting to see their favorite stars in heroic roles were shocked to find them playing such despicable characters. Some theaters reported walkouts during early screenings. The production was famously difficult. Cinematographer James Wong Howe insisted on shooting at night in actual New York locations rather than sets, a revolutionary approach at the time. Curtis and Lancaster clashed with McKendrick, who pushed them toward increasingly dark performances. Elmer Bernstein's jazz score was considered so avant-garde that producers tried to replace it. Today, it's recognized as having some of the most quotable dialogue in film history. Lines like, "The cat's in the bag and the bag's in the river," and "You're dead, son. Get yourself buried," are studied in screenwriting classes worldwide. Martin Scorsese has called it the film that most influenced me when making films about New York. And in 2019, the British Film Institute ranked it the 63rd greatest film of all time. Number 3. Vertigo, 1958. Hard to believe now, but Hitchcock's psychological masterpiece about obsession and identity was considered a career low point when released. James Stewart plays a detective with a fear of heights who becomes obsessed with a mysterious woman he's hired to follow. The film's dreamlike pacing, sexual themes, and ambiguous ending baffled 1950s audiences, expecting straightforward thrills. Paramount was disappointed with the box office returns, just $3.2 million against a $2.5 million budget. Critics dismissed it as slow, far-fetched, and too long. Hitchcock himself considered it a failure and blamed Stewart for being too old for the romantic lead. The film performed so poorly that Hitchcock ended his long partnership with Stewart, believing the actor had lost his commercial appeal. The production faced numerous challenges. Kim Novak wasn't Hitchcock's first choice, Vera Miles was, but she became pregnant before shooting. The revolutionary Vertigo effect shots, where the camera simultaneously zooms in while tracking backward, took weeks to perfect. Bernard Herrmann's haunting score was almost rejected by the studio for being too weird. In 2012, Vertigo dethroned Citizen Kane as the greatest film of all time in the prestigious Sight and Sound Critics poll after Kane's 50-year reign at number 1. Today, it's studied as Hitchcock's most personal work, a film that exposed his own obsessions and controlling nature. As Martin Scorsese noted, Vertigo isn't just Hitchcock's greatest film. It's the most honest film ever made about the sickness at the heart of romantic longing. Number 2, The Night of the Hunter, 1955. This surreal thriller about a murderous preacher hunting 2 children for hidden money was so poorly received, it became the only film Charles Laughton ever directed. Robert Mitchum delivers an iconic performance as Reverend Powell, a serial killer with love and hate tattooed on his knuckles, hunting down 2 children who know where $10,000 is hidden. United Artists had no idea how to market this nightmare fairy tale. The film lost nearly its entire $795,000 budget, playing to empty theaters across America. Critics called it an artistic disaster and pretentious garbage. Laughton, devastated by the rejection, never stepped behind the camera again, robbing cinema of what might have been a legendary directing career. The production was notoriously difficult. Laughton fought constantly with cinematographer Stanley Cortez. Child actress Sally Jane Bruce struggled so much with her lines that Laughton had to dub most of her dialogue himself. Robert Mitchum, seeing Laughton's distress, actually directed some scenes when Laughton became overwhelmed. François Truffaut later called it the most beautiful black and white film of the 1950s. Roger Ebert gave it a perfect score in his revisit, saying, "It's one of the most frightening movies ever made." In 1992, the Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry. Today, film schools teach it as a perfect fusion of German Expressionism and American Gothic, a singular vision that came 50 years before audiences were ready for it. Number 1. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. This paranoid masterpiece about aliens replacing humans with emotionless duplicates terrified studio executives who forced director Don Siegel to add a hopeful framing device against his wishes. The result was still one of the most chilling allegories of the Cold War era, a film that works as both straight horror and political commentary. Allied artists had no faith in the film. They cut several scenes, added narration, and tacked on an optimistic ending that completely undermined the film's message. Initial box office was mediocre, around $1.2 million, barely covering its modest budget. Some theaters marketed it as a standard B-movie sci-fi flick, completely missing its deeper themes. The production faced bizarre challenges. The studio kept demanding script changes to make it less frightening. Actor Kevin McCarthy later revealed that Don Siegel would secretly shoot the darker version he wanted while pretending to film the studio's approved scenes. The famous pot effects were achieved with simple inflatable sex dolls covered in dyed cotton, a low-budget solution that proved surprisingly effective. The film has been reinterpreted constantly throughout the decades. In the 50s, it was seen as anti-communist. In the 60s, anti-conformist. By the 70s, critics read it as anti-McCarthyism. Walter Mirisch, who produced it, later admitted, "We didn't realize we were making a film that would still be scaring the hell out of people 65 years later." Today, it's been remade 3 times, but none have matched the primal terror of the original. Directors from John Carpenter to Jordan Peele cite it as a major influence. As film critic Kim Newman noted, Body Snatchers works because its horror isn't the pods themselves, but the terrifying moment when you realize no one believes you and you're completely alone. Which of these rediscovered classics surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments which film you think was most ahead of its time. And here's a controversial question to settle in the comments. Are modern audiences actually smarter than 1950s viewers? Or did these films fail because they violated unwritten rules about what movies were supposed to do? Hit subscribe for more lost classics and cinema secrets from the vault.